The school bell rang like a guillotine, slicing through the humid air of Willow Creek, Georgia, as if it knew what was coming. By noon, the whole town would be whispering about the boy who dared to dream beyond his skin. Elijah Carter, 16, stood in the principal's office, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded jeans. The room smelled of old wood and older grudges. Principal Hargrove, a man with a face like a clenched fist, leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold as the linoleum floor. Beside him, Mrs. Whitaker, Elijah's history teacher, clutched a crumpled piece of paper, his essay on the civil rights movement, marked with a red F in her sharp, angry scrawl. "You think you can rewrite history, boy?" Mrs. Whitaker's voice was a whip, cracking through the silence. This propaganda you turned in? It's disrespectful to this institution." Elijah's jaw tightened. He'd spent nights poring over library books, piecing together stories of courage and resistance, stories that felt like they belonged to him. His essay wasn't propaganda, it was truth, raw and unfiltered, about the struggles his people faced. But in Willow Creek, truth was a dangerous thing when it came from a black farmer's son. "I didn't disrespect anyone," Elijah said, his voice steady but burning. "I wrote what happened. You can't fail me for that." Hargrove's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "You're out of line, Elijah. This school has standards. You've been warned before disrupting class, challenging authority. Now this." He slid a suspension notice across the desk. "You're expelled. Effective immediately." The word hit like a punch to the gut. Elijah's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. He'd seen his father, Amos Carter, face worse bankers who sneered when he asked for loans, neighbors who crossed the street to avoid him. If his father could stand tall, so could he. "You're making a mistake," Elijah said, his voice low, dangerous. "This isn't over." Mrs. Whitaker scoffed, her lips curling. "Go back to your daddy's fields, Elijah. That's where you belong." The words stung, but Elijah didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He grabbed his backpack, the straps worn from years of use, and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The hallway was a blur of lockers and curious eyes, students whispering as he passed. By the time he reached the school's front steps, the weight of it all, expulsion, humiliation, the suffocating grip of Willow Creek's prejudices, pressed down on him. But Elijah Carter wasn't broken. Not yet. Outside, the late September sun baked the cracked pavement. Amos was waiting by his rusted pickup truck, his work boots caked in red Georgia clay. He didn't need to ask what happened. The fire in Elijah's eyes told the story. "They threw you out?" Amos's voice was gravelly, worn from years of shouting over tractors and whispering prayers for better days. Elijah nodded, his throat tight, said, "I don't belong here." Amos's face hardened, but his eyes softened with a pain only a father could know. "You belong anywhere you damn well please, son. Don't let them tell you different." That night, the Carter farmhouse was quiet, save for the creak of the porch swing where Elijah sat, staring at the stars. His mother, Ruth, was inside, her hands busy with dishes but her heart heavy with worry. Amos stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim kitchen light. "We'll fight this," Amos said. "They can't do this to you." Elijah wanted to believe him, but Willow Creek wasn't a place that bent to fairness. It was a town where history clung like damp moss, where black families like the Carters were tolerated but never truly welcomed. The school board was a fortress of old money and older biases, and Hargrove was their loyal gatekeeper. Fighting them felt like spitting into the wind. The next morning, the town woke to a sight no one expected. A sleek black Rolls-Royce, its chrome gleaming like a polished blade, rolled down Main Street, turning heads and silencing chatter. It pulled up to the school, its engine purring with quiet menace. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his presence as commanding as the car itself. He was tall, black, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to see through walls. In his hand was a leather briefcase, embossed with the initials JL. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was he? A lawyer? Politician? No one in Willow Creek had ever seen a car like that, let alone a man like him. The crowd outside the school grew, students and teachers spilling onto the lawn, their curiosity tinged with unease. Elijah and Amos arrived just as the man approached the school's entrance. Hargrove was already there, his face a mix of confusion and defiance. Mrs. Whitaker stood beside him, her arms crossed, her lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. "Principal Hargrove," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "My name is Jonathan Langston. I'm here on behalf of Elijah Carter." Hargrove blinked, caught off guard. "And who exactly are you?" Langston smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I'm the man who's going to make you regret expelling that boy." The crowd gasped, the air thick with tension. Elijah's heart raced. He didn't know this man, but something about him felt like salvation. Amos's hand gripped his shoulder, steadying him. Langston opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, holding them up for all to see. "This is Elijah's essay, the one you called propaganda. It's also the winning submission in the National Young Historians Contest, selected by a panel of professors from Harvard, Yale, and Howard University. It's being published next month in a collection of essays on American history." The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. Mrs. Whitaker's face paled, her hands dropping to her sides. Hargrove's mouth opened, but no words came. "And this," Langston continued, pulling out another document, "is a formal complaint filed with the State Education Board, alleging racial discrimination in your decision to expel Elijah. I've already spoken to the superintendent. They're launching an investigation into your school's practices, effective today." Hargrove's face turned red, his fists clenching. "You can't just waltz in here and—" "I'm not finished." Langston cut him off, his voice like a blade. "You see, Elijah's essay caught the attention of some very important people. One of them is my employer, who happens to fund scholarships for students like Elijah students who dare to speak truth in places like this." He gestured to the Rolls-Royce. "He sent me to deliver a message. Elijah Carter is not only reinstated, but he's been offered a full scholarship to any university in the country." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others whispering in disbelief. Elijah's knees felt weak, his mind spinning. A scholarship? Him? The son of a farmer? The boy who'd been told he'd never amount to anything? Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "This is absurd. That boy's been nothing but trouble. You can't just—" "Enough," Langston snapped, his eyes locking onto hers. "You failed him because of who he is, not what he wrote. And that's a mistake you'll answer for." Amos stepped forward, his voice low but resonant. "You thought you could break my boy. You thought you could break us. But we're still here, and we ain't going nowhere." The crowd was silent now, the weight of his words settling over them. Elijah felt a fire in his chest, a mix of pride and defiance. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for his father, his mother, every black family in Willow Creek who'd been told to stay in their place. Langston turned to Elijah, his expression softening. "You've got a gift, son. Your words woke people up. Don't ever stop using them." Elijah nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He looked at his father, at the crowd, at the Rolls-Royce that had rolled into town like a promise. For the first time in his life, he felt seen not as a farmer's son, not as a black kid in a white town, but as Elijah Carter, a voice that could change things. But the fight was far from over. Hargrove wasn't the type to back down, and Mrs. Whitaker's glare promised retaliation. The school board would dig in their heels, and the town's whispers would turn to shouts. Elijah knew this wasn't just about him, Anna Marie, it was about every kid who'd been pushed down, every family who'd been silenced. And as the Rolls-Royce pulled away, its engine fading into the distance, Elijah made a vow. He'd keep writing, keep fighting, until Willow Creek had no choice but to listen. The days that followed were a storm of tension and hope. The state investigation sent ripples through the town, exposing cracks in the school's facade of fairness. Parents began speaking out, some in support of Elijah, others clinging to the old ways. The local paper ran a story about his essay, and soon, letters from across the country poured in, some praising his courage, others dripping with venom. Elijah read every one, his resolve growing with each word. Amos and Ruth stood by him, their small farmhouse becoming a hub of quiet resistance. Neighbors who'd once kept their distance now stopped by, offering words of support or sharing their own stories of injustice. It was as if Elijah's expulsion had lit a spark, and Willow Creek was starting to burn. But Hargrove wasn't done. He called an emergency school board meeting, rallying his allies to fight the investigation. Mrs. Whitaker, emboldened by her supporters, doubled down, claiming Elijah's essay was a deliberate attack on the school's values. The town was splitting down the middle, and Elijah was at the center of it all. One night, as Elijah sat at the kitchen table, his mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "You scared, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but strong. Elijah shook his head, though his heart said otherwise. "I'm hungry, Mama." "They don't get to decide who I am." Ruth smiled, her eyes glistening. "That's my boy. You keep that fire, but don't let it burn you up. You're bigger than this town." The next morning, Elijah woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Another car, this time a beat-up sedan, pulled up to the farmhouse. It was a reporter from Atlanta, her camera ready, her questions sharp. She wanted Elijah's story, the real story, not the one Hargrove was spinning. Elijah hesitated, then thought of his father's calloused hands, his mother's quiet strength, the handwritten note on that signpost. "Justice comes for the brave." He took a deep breath and began to speak. The reporter's pen flew across her notepad as Elijah spoke, his voice steady but laced with the weight of years unspoken. He told her about the essay, the expulsion, the way Mrs. Whitaker's red pen had felt like a brand on his future. He spoke of his father's endless days in the fields, his mother's quiet prayers, and the town that seemed to hold its breath every time a black voice rose too loud. The reporter, a woman named Clara with sharp eyes and a gentle nod, listened without interrupting, her camera capturing the raw honesty in Elijah's face. By the time she left, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Elijah stood on the porch, watching her car disappear down the dirt road. He felt exposed, like he'd handed a stranger the map to his soul. But there was no turning back now. His story was out there, and Willow Creek would have to face it. The article hit the Atlanta papers the next day, a headline screaming across the front page. "Small-town school expels black student for writing truth." The story spread faster than a summer storm, picked up by national outlets, shared across social media, and debated on morning talk shows. Elijah's essay was published online, and the comments poured in, some calling him a hero, others a troublemaker. He read them all, his heart swelling and sinking with each one. The world was watching, and Willow Creek was no longer just a speck on the map. At school, the air was thick with tension. Hargrove's office was swarmed with calls from reporters, parents, and state officials. The investigation was moving faster than he'd expected, with auditors arriving to comb through years of disciplinary records. Whispers of bias, of unfair punishments targeting Black and Latino students, began to surface. Hargrove's allies on the school board scrambled to control the narrative, but the cracks in their armor were growing. Mrs. Whitaker, meanwhile, doubled down. At a town hall meeting, she stood before a packed gymnasium, her voice shrill as she defended her actions. "That boy's essay was divisive," she declared, her hands gripping the podium. "It painted our community as villains, our history as shameful. I was protecting our values." The crowd was split. Some clapped, others booed. A mother in the back, her voice trembling, stood up. "My son's been suspended 3 times this year for nothing more than talking back. You don't protect our values, Mrs. Whitaker. You protect your own." The room erupted, arguments flaring like sparks. Elijah sat in the back with Amos and Ruth, his heart pounding. He hadn't wanted Thesa town torn apart, neighbors shouting at neighbors, but he couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth was afire, and he'd lit the match. After the meeting, a group of students approached Elijah outside. They were a mix of faces: Black, white, Latino, some he knew, others he didn't. A girl named Maya, who'd always been quiet in class, spoke first. "I read your essay, Elijah. It made me see things differently. I'm sorry I didn't say anything before." Another boy, a senior named Tyler, shuffled his feet. "My dad says you're stirring up trouble, but I think you're right. The school's messed up. What can we do?" Elijah looked at them, their eyes full of questions he wasn't sure he could answer. But he thought of Jonathan Langston, of the Rolls Royce that had rolled into town like a promise. "We keep talking," he said. "We keep telling the truth, even when it's hard." The next week was a blur of protests and counter-protests. Students organized a walkout, marching to the town square with signs that read, "Justice for Elijah" and "Truth Matters." Counter-protesters, mostly older residents, waved their own signs, "Respect our traditions and stop dividing us." The local news captured it all, the cameras lingering on Elijah as he stood with his classmates, his father's hand on his shoulder. Amos became a quiet force in the movement, his presence steadying the younger voices. He spoke at community meetings, his words simple but heavy. "I ain't asking for special treatment," he said at one gathering, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I'm asking for my son to be treated like he matters, like we all matter." Ruth, too, found her voice. She started a support group for parents, a place to share stories of discrimination and hope. The farmhouse kitchen became a meeting space, the table covered with coffee mugs and handwritten notes. For the first time, Elijah saw his mother as more than just his protector. She was a warrior, her quiet strength a weapon against the town's indifference. Jonathan Langston returned a week later, this distinctive. "I want to make sure you're prepared for what's coming. The board's vote is next week, and they're feeling the pressure. You've got a lot of eyes on you now, Elijah. Use them wisely." Elijah nodded, his mind racing. The scholarship was a lifeline, but it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Maya, who wanted to study law to fight for kids like them. It was about Tyler, who was starting to question the stories his family told. It was about every kid in Willow Creek who'd been told to stay small. The board meeting was a circus. Hargrove and his allies argued for tradition, for order. But the room was packed with Elijah's supporter students, parents, even a few teachers who'd stayed silent too long. Clara, the reporter, was there, her camera rolling. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Elijah was reinstated, and Mrs. Whitaker was placed on leave pending a full investigation. The crowd outside cheered as Elijah stepped into the sunlight, his parents flanking him. He felt the weight of their pride, their sacrifice, and the weight of the fight still ahead. Willow Creek was changing, But change was slow, and scars ran deep. He thought of the handwritten note on that signpost. Justice comes for the brave. He'd been brave and justice had come, but it wasn't the end. That night, Elijah sat at his desk, a blank page before him. He picked up his pen, the same one he'd used to write his essay, and began to write again. Not an essay this time, but a letter to every kid in every town like Willow Creek, telling them their voice mattered, their truth mattered. He wrote until the stars faded and the sun rose, his words a promise to keep fighting. The Rolls-Royce was gone, but its message lingered. Power wasn't in the car or the suit, but in the courage to stand up, to speak out, to demand better. Elijah Carter was just a farmer's son, but he was also a spark, and Willow Creek would never be the same. What do you think? Where does justice begin? And how do we heal a divided community?